The October wind screamed across the Nevada desert like a blade wrapped in ice, and inside the black SUV, 7-year-old Emma Castellano's skin turned the color of a winter sky. Her small fingers clawed at her throat. Her eyes rolled backward. The hard candy lodged deep, choking off every breath, every sound, every chance. The 4 men in tailored suits froze. Their hands moved toward the concealed weapons beneath their jackets, but they did not draw. Protocol demanded they wait for instruction. Protocol demanded they call for a medical team. Protocol demanded they follow the chain of command that had kept them alive in a world where one wrong move meant burial in the desert. But Nora Harper did not know protocol. She did not know who owned the vehicle. She did not know that stopping at this rest stop on Highway 15 at 2:16 in the morning was supposed to be impossible, that the route was cleared, that the men traveling with this child answered only to the most feared crime lord in Nevada. She knew only that a child was dying. Nora yanked open the rear passenger door. The cold hit her like a slap. Her breath came in white clouds, and the pain in her ribs screamed as she moved, a reminder of Douglas's fists from exactly 1 hour earlier, from the motel room where he had beaten her for the money she did not have. "Step away," one of the men said. His voice was flat, professional, the voice of someone trained to give orders that people obeyed. Nora ignored him. She reached into the SUV and pulled Emma from the leather seat. The girl weighed almost nothing, like picking up a bundle of sticks wrapped in a pink jacket. Nora turned the child sideways, positioned her own bleeding hands, still wet from the beating, beneath Emma's rib cage, and performed the Heimlich with shaking arms. Once. Twice. The candy flew out and landed on the asphalt, a small dark thing that had almost stolen a life. Emma gasped. She coughed. She breathed. And in that moment, the man stepping out of the lead vehicle saw something that would reshape the entire architecture of his future. Aleandro Castellano was 6 feet 2 inches tall, with broad shoulders that filled a cashmere coat worth more than Nora Harper had earned in 3 years of night shifts. His hair was dark, graying slightly at the temples, and his eyes were the color of storm clouds. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye to his cheekbone, a thin line that caught the light when he moved. He was 43 years old. He had been called many things, the ghost, the architect, the devil of Las Vegas, but no one had ever called him merciful. He watched this woman cradling his niece. He watched her check Emma's pulse with fingers still bleeding. He watched her whisper words against the child's hair, "It's okay, sweetie, you're okay now, you're safe, you're safe." He watched her shield the child from the cold Nevada wind with her own body. Marco, his lieutenant for 15 years, stepped forward. His hand remained visible, non-threatening, but his eyes tracked every movement Nora made. He said, his voice steady as a metronome, "Step away from the child." Aleandro's voice cut through the October darkness like venom poured into still water. "Lower your weapons." The 4 men froze. In 15 years of working for Aleandro Castellano, Marco had never heard him speak to them with anything other than instruction or silence. He had never countermanded an order that protected the family. He had never shown preference to a stranger over protocol. The woman, Aleandro said, moving toward them with the careful deliberation of a predator who had already decided not to strike, just saved her life. "Stand down." Nora looked up as he approached. Her eyes were blue-gray, the color of winter water, and they held no recognition of who he was. She looked at him the way people looked at unexpected things, with surprise, with caution, with the bone-deep instinct of someone whose life had taught her that powerful men were dangerous. Aleandro's gaze moved across her face and registered everything. The swelling beneath her left eye, purple-black and angry. The handprint bruises encircling her throat, finger marks still fresh enough that he could count them. The split in her lower lip. The way she held Emma suggested she was in pain, probably ribs, possibly worse. His own hand lifted, and he traced the air near her swollen eye without touching her, as though he might cause more damage simply by making contact. "Who did this to you?" His voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying. It was the quiet of someone who had moved beyond anger into something else entirely, something darker and more methodical. Nora's jaw tightened. She did not answer. Instead, she turned her attention back to Emma, checking the child's breathing again, running her hands over her shoulders and arms to assess for injury. Emma was crying now, the kind of silent crying that comes after the body has been through something it did not understand. She reached for Aleandro. "Uncle," she said, her voice fractured like breaking glass. "I couldn't breathe." Aleandro took his niece. He held her against his chest, and for a moment, a brief, almost imperceptible moment, something in his face shifted. The hardness did not disappear, but beneath it, someone watching carefully would have seen something that looked almost like grief. This child was the last piece of his family. His brother had betrayed him years ago for money and power. His parents were gone. Emma was the only person in his entire empire of violence and money and fear who loved him simply because he existed. He looked back at the woman who had saved her. "Come with me," he said. It was not a request. "We need to see what other damage has been done." Nora stepped back. Her hands came up, defensive, and in that gesture Aleandro saw something he recognized. She had learned to move away from powerful men. She had learned that safety required distance. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, shaped by fear and pain and something else, exhaustion so profound it seemed to radiate from her like heat from cooling metal. "Thank you for stopping. I'll go back to my car and—" "Your car," Marco said quietly, "is still 6 miles north. Dead engine. Tow truck is being arranged, but it will be 2 hours minimum before they arrive." Nora's face changed. Something collapsed in it. "What?" Her hand went to her pocket, and she withdrew something that crumpled slightly, a worn piece of fabric that had once been a pocket. Inside was $34. $34 in cash, which was all the money she had left in the world. Aleandro watched her do the mathematics of survival in her head, could almost see the numbers being arranged and rearranged and found wanting. "A tow truck costs," she whispered, "I don't have, the estimate alone would be more than I have." "Get in the car," Aleandro said. "Sir, I can't afford." "Get in the car, Nora Harper." She froze. Her eyes widened. "How do you know my name?" Marco and Luca exchanged a look that spoke of the danger in what they were witnessing. In 15 years of working for Aleandro Castellano, they had never seen him know a stranger's name before asking for it. They had never seen him use kindness the way other men used weapons. And they knew, in the way that men who work in darkness know things without being told, that something had fundamentally shifted. "Your wallet is in your jacket pocket," Aleandro said. "You reached for it when you were concerned about money." Marco has excellent instincts about details. "But more importantly," I asked. Luca had already moved. He opened the rear door of the SUV, and the interior light spilled out like honey. It revealed leather seats worth more than Nora's entire apartment, climate control already running, and Emma sitting with her small legs swinging, looking at this stranger with the confusion of a child who had just been saved and did not understand why her uncle was allowing the rescuer inside their world. Nora hesitated for only a moment. The October wind bit at her face, and behind her, 6 miles away, her beat-up sedan sat dead on the side of the highway with her 2 children waiting in the back seat, Marcus aged 5 and Lily aged 3, and the heat running low because she rationed the engine to save gas money. She got in. The interior of the SUV was warm. It was so warm that for a moment, Nora felt dizzy. She could not remember the last time she had been warm. She could not remember the last time she had sat in a car without calculating the cost of every minute of running it. Luca closed the door. The sound it made was solid, expensive, final. Emma immediately moved closer to Nora. The child had no fear. The child had seen trauma through the eyes of a loved one and recognized rescue when it happened, even from a stranger. "What's your name?" Emma asked. "Nora," she said. "You saved me," Emma said. "From the candy?" "Yes, baby. I did. Thank you." Nora's throat tightened. She could not cry. She had learned years ago that tears did not help, that tears came only when hope arrived, and hope was dangerous. But she could feel the edges of it, pressing against her chest like a hand trying to break through glass. From the front seat, Marco made a call. The vehicle at mile marker 147. 2 children, approximately ages 5 and 3. Bring them to the downtown facility. Full security, no questions asked. Nora heard this and understood only fragments. She looked at Aleandro. My children. How did you? We passed your vehicle, Aleandro said. We noted the situation. They will be brought to somewhere warm. They will be safe. But I don't have money to pay for. You saved Emma's life. Aleandro's storm-grey eyes held hers, and in them was something that looked almost like a glimpse into an older version of himself, a version that had existed before power had calcified his heart into something almost inhuman. In this world, some debts cannot be paid with money. And at that moment, at 2:56 in the morning on a freezing October highway, Nora Harper did not know that the man beside her controlled the largest criminal enterprise in Nevada. She did not know that his brother had betrayed him for money, or that he had spent 20 years building an empire from that betrayal. She did not know that the hand that had reached toward her bruised face had ordered the destruction of families. She knew only that Emma had been dying, and then she was not. She knew that her children would be brought to somewhere warm. She knew that this man had made that happen with a sentence. What she did not know was that in 7 days, Douglas Hale would demand the $125,000 he believed she owed him. What she did not know was that Cordelia Blackwood, a woman as beautiful as she was vicious, with a smile that cut like broken glass, would step into Nora's life with the specific intention of destroying it. What she did not know was that the moment she reached into that SUV and performed the Heimlich on a choking child, she had altered the trajectory of her own fate in ways she could not yet imagine. The SUV pulled back onto the highway. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, empty and dark and cold. Behind them, the lights of Las Vegas glowed against the black sky like a promise or a threat, depending on who you were and what you had already lost. Nora Harper held Emma Castellano's small hand, and neither of them knew that this was the moment everything changed. For hours earlier, the October night hung heavy over the desert like a curse that could not be lifted. Nora Harper's 2003 Honda Civic sputtered and wheezed along the empty highway 20 miles outside Las Vegas, the engine making sounds like a dying animal in its final moments. The dashboard lights blinked red. 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 A warning she could not afford to ignore and could not afford to fix. She pulled onto the shoulder and the car simply stopped, as if it had given up on her the way everything else had. In the back seat, her 2 children huddled beneath a thin grey blanket that smelled like laundry detergent from 3 months ago. Maya was 9 years old, dark-haired like her father, and she sat perfectly still the way children do when they sense their mother's fear. Tyler was 6. His breath came in small clouds in the unheated car, and he was crying without making sound, the way he had learned to cry so his mother would not have to comfort him while she fell apart. Nora turned around to look at them, and the sight of their small bodies shivering in the cold nearly broke something in her chest. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her wallet. The leather was cracked from use, worn thin at the corners. Her hands shook as she counted the bills inside. 110. 2 5s. 4 1s. She counted again because the number could not possibly be correct. $34. $34 between her family and the street. Between her children and hunger. Between this moment and complete annihilation. The wind howled across the desert floor, cutting through her torn jacket like a blade wrapped in ice. Dead leaves skittered across the asphalt, dancing in the headlights of cars that did not stop. The distant lights of Las Vegas glowed against the black sky 20 miles away, mocking her, promising warmth and safety to people who deserved it more than she did. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Nora knew who it was before she looked. She always knew. The message came through in all capital letters, each word a threat shaped like text. 7 days left. $125,000. You know what happens if you run. Her hands began to shake. She deleted the message immediately, but not before Tyler saw her face go completely white. "Mommy, what's wrong?" His voice was small, fractured, uncertain. "Nothing, baby. We're just having car trouble. Nothing to worry about." But Nora was lying. She was always lying now. That was what survival looked like, constant lies stacked on top of each other like bricks in a wall. 6 months ago, her husband James had died of a sudden heart attack at work. 42 years old. One moment he was walking across a parking lot at lunch, and the next moment he was simply gone, erased from the world, leaving behind a wife and 2 children and a mountain of medical bills that no insurance would cover because the insurance had lapsed 2 months before he died. The funeral cost $8,000. Nora had begged, borrowed, sold everything she owned that had any value. She still came up short. That was when Douglas Hale appeared. She had met him at the diner where she worked as a night shift waitress, pouring coffee for strangers, collecting tips that barely paid for gas. Douglas was handsome in a way that looked expensive. Dark suit. Gold rings on his fingers. Eyes that moved across her face like he was calculating something. He sat in booth 7 for 3 hours one Tuesday night and left a $500 tip on a $70 tab. He came back the next week. And the week after. He started talking to her during her breaks. He listened when she cried about the funeral bills. He offered to help. Just a small loan, he said. $5,000. She could pay it back slowly. There were no strings attached. She had believed him because she was desperate, and desperate people believe lies they know are lies because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. The loan was not $5,000. When Douglas came to collect it 6 weeks later, he explained that there had been interest and fees. And because she had not been able to pay, there were additional penalties. What she actually owed was $35,000. And if she could not pay that, well, there were other ways to repay a debt like this. Ways that involved working for him. Ways that involved things she could not bring herself to name. She had learned at that moment that Douglas Hale ran a human trafficking network. He used women like her, desperate, broken, with children to feed, and sold them into situations from which there was no escape. He had done this to hundreds of women. Maybe thousands. And now she was one of them. Nora had run instead. She had taken her children and whatever money remained, and she had driven away in the middle of the night. She burned through her savings in 6 weeks, terrible hotels, cheap food, gas that cost more than hope. Now she had $34 left, and Douglas's text messages had become more frequent, more violent in their tone. 7 days. That was all the time she had before he found her. And he would find her. Men like Douglas Hale always found what they were hunting. Maya tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, I'm cold. When can we get somewhere warm?" "Soon, baby. Very soon." But Nora did not know where soon was. She had been driving for 6 weeks with no destination except away, and away had finally run out of road. She made a decision. They would walk to the next town, it had to be only a few miles. They would find a church or a shelter. She would beg if necessary. People helped people, sometimes. Maybe not people like her, people who had made terrible mistakes and borrowed money they could not repay. But maybe the children. People help children. She unbuckled her seatbelt and turned around to prepare them. Tyler was still crying silently. Maya was staring out the window at the darkness like it held answers. "We're going to walk for a little while, okay? It's cold, but we'll keep each other warm. I want you both to hold my hands and stay very close." Tyler nodded. He did not ask questions anymore. He had learned not to ask questions. Maya simply moved, gathering the blanket around her shoulders like a cape. Nora lifted Tyler onto her back. He wrapped his small arms around her neck, and she felt his tears against her skin. She took Maya's hand, and they stepped out of the car and into the October wind. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. They walked along the shoulder of the highway, their breath visible in the cold, the lights of Vegas seeming to get no closer no matter how far they walked. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights sweeping across them and then moving on. No one stopped. No one even slowed down. Nora understood. A bleeding woman with 2 children was not a good sign. A woman on the side of a dark highway at night was a warning, not an invitation. Maya's hand began to shake in hers. Tyler had stopped crying and gone completely silent, his small body heavy against her back. "How much further, Mom?" Maya's voice was barely audible. "Not far now, baby. I can see lights ahead." She was lying again. She could see lights, but they were the same lights that had been the same distance away for the past 30 minutes. She could see no town, no buildings, no shelter. She could see only darkness and cold and the vast indifference of the desert. Her legs felt like they were made of lead. Her lungs burned from breathing in the cold air. She was thinking about stopping, about sitting down in the scrub brush with her children and simply waiting for something to happen, when she saw them. Headlights appeared on the highway behind them. Not one car. 6 black SUVs, moving in perfect formation through the October night like sharks moving through water. They moved in complete silence, the kind of silence that comes from vehicles worth more money than Nora would earn in a lifetime. Her first instinct was pure animal fear. Run. Grab the children. Hide. She pulled Maya off the road and into the scrub brush, stumbling over rocks and dead branches. Tyler bounced against her back. Maya's hand squeezed her mother's hand so hard it cut off the blood flow. But the convoy did not pass by. The convoy stopped directly in front of where they had been standing. Car doors opened. Men emerged in perfect formation, their black suits immaculate, their movements synchronized. There were at least 8 of them. Maybe more. It was hard to count when every instinct in your body was screaming at you to run. Then came the scream. Not from one of the men. From inside one of the vehicles. A child was screaming. A young child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, the same size as Tyler. The sound was pure panic, the sound of something being choked, the sound of a life ending. Help! Someone help! The baby is choking. Nora's body moved before her mind could tell it to stop. She pushed Maya toward the rocks. Stay here. Do not move. Do not come out until I come back for you. Mommy, no. But Nora was already running. She ran toward the SUVs, toward the men in black suits, toward the sound of a child dying. She had spent 6 months running from Douglas Hale. She had spent 6 weeks running from danger. But she could not run from this. She could not run from a child screaming. One of the men grabbed her arm, but she wrenched it free with a strength that surprised them both. Which car? She screamed. Which one? Backseat, center vehicle, but you need to. Nora did not wait to hear the rest. She ran to the center SUV, yanked open the back door, and saw a small girl, maybe 6 years old, her face turning purple, her hands clawing at her throat, making the terrible choking sound of a body that cannot breathe. Nora did not think. She pulled the child out of the car, positioned her against her body, and performed the Heimlich maneuver. Once. Twice. On the 3rd thrust, something released. A piece of bread, small and white, ejected from the child's mouth and fell onto the asphalt. The girl gasped. Sucked in air. Gasped again. And in that moment, in the cold October night on a dark highway outside Las Vegas, the child's eyes opened, and they were the color of storm clouds, exactly like the eyes of the man now stepping out of the front seat of the vehicle. Nora Harper had just saved the life of Emma Castellano. The child's father was Aleandro Castellano, the most feared crime lord in Nevada. And neither of them knew how much this moment would cost. The October wind cut through the hospital waiting room like a blade wrapped in ice as Nora Harper sat alone, her cracked phone screen glowing in her hands. 3 texts had come through while she was in the examination room. 3 messages from a number she'd been trying to forget. 6 days. That's what the most recent one said. 6 days until $125,000 came due, or everything she had left, which was nothing except her 2 children sleeping in a car 3 blocks away, would be taken from her in ways she couldn't bear to imagine. The doctor had wrapped her ribs. 3 were cracked. Severe bruising along her entire left side. The handprints on her throat would fade to yellow and green before they disappeared entirely, but the memory of Douglas's hands around her neck, squeezing, threatening, promising exactly what he would do when she failed to pay, would not fade so easily. She'd run that night. Packed Tyler and Maya into her ancient sedan with nothing but a trash bag of clothes and the photograph of Marcus in her pocket, the only thing of real value she owned in the entire world. The photograph was worn at the edges from her touching it 1,000 times a day, from her showing it to her children and saying, "Your daddy loved you so much, and he would want us to be brave right now, even though Mommy is terrified. Even though Mommy made a terrible mistake by trusting someone who smiled like a friend and calculated like a monster." The waiting room was empty except for her. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a grey-white pallor that made her bruised hands look like they belonged to a corpse. She should have called someone. A friend. A family member. But there was no one left. Her mother was gone. Her sister had stopped answering her calls after the second time Nora asked for money. Her co-workers at the diner had their own problems, their own desperate survival equations ticking away in their own tired heads. She was alone. Completely. And in 6 days, she would have nothing to show for all of it except the memory of trying. The automatic doors at the entrance slid open, and the October wind rushed in like something alive, carrying the smell of rain and asphalt and the faint metallic scent of fear. Nora pulled her thin jacket tighter around herself and kept her eyes on her phone, on those 3 words that had become her entire world. 6 days, it said. That's all you have. She didn't look up as footsteps approached. Measured. Deliberate. The kind of footsteps that belong to someone accustomed to taking up space, to expecting people to move out of their way. She heard the scrape of a chair being pulled across linoleum. Heard the soft rustle of an expensive coat, cashmere, the kind that cost more than her entire month's worth of tips combined. "You should have let my men take you to the emergency room instead of a public hospital." The voice was deep and solid like an oath. Like a door being sealed. Like the sound of a cage locking. Nora looked up, and there was Aleandro Castellano, sitting in the plastic chair beside her as if he had every right to be there, as if hospital waiting rooms weren't places where men like him belonged. He was dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than her car, with an open white shirt that showed the faint line of a scar running from his collarbone downward, disappearing beneath the fabric. His hair was black with silver threading at the temples. His eyes were the exact color of the storm clouds that had filled Emma's eyes on the highway, and they were studying Nora with an intensity that made her skin crawl and her heart accelerate at the same time. One of his hands rested on the armrest of his chair. Gold watch. Silver rings on 2 fingers. A scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone, thin and precise like it had been made by something deliberate. "I needed to know my children were safe," Nora said, her voice barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. "I couldn't take them to one of your places. I couldn't." "Couldn't what?" Aleandro leaned forward slightly. "Couldn't admit that you need help? That you're drowning and you can't touch the bottom?" Nora said nothing. Her hands started to shake, and she gripped them together so hard her knuckles turned white. "Marco told me about the phone," Aleandro continued. "The messages. He showed me the conversation thread. 53 messages over the course of 6 months, each one escalating in its threats, each one more specific about what he plans to do to you, to your children, to your body when you cannot pay. Is that the sum total of your communication with Douglas Hale? Messages and threats. How did you? I own this hospital. Every security camera. Every network. Every piece of information that flows through this building comes across my desk. Your children are safe in a pediatric wing with 2 of my nurses monitoring them. They've been fed. They've been given clean clothes. Tyler has been asking about dinosaurs for the past 2 hours, and Maya has finally stopped crying long enough to sleep. The mention of her children safe, fed, cared for broke something open in Nora's chest. Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them, before she could compose herself into the careful mask of survival she'd been wearing for 6 weeks. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this?" Aleandro's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked almost like recognition. Like pain. "Because you saved my daughter without knowing who I was. Because in this city, in this world I've built from blood and debt and difficult choices, almost no one does anything without calculating the angle first. Without wondering what they'll get in return. But you ran into the path of my convoy, toward danger and men with guns, because a child was dying. You didn't ask who she was. You didn't bargain. You simply moved." The way he said it, with such careful precision, made Nora understand that this was not casual conversation. This was something he needed her to comprehend with every fiber of her being. "I'm nobody," she said. "I'm just a waitress. A single mother who made one terrible mistake and can't get out from under it." "You are nobody," Aleandro said, his voice dropping lower, "because people like Douglas Hale and Cordelia Blackwood have spent their careers convincing women like you that your lives have no value. That your desperation makes you disposable. That you exist only as vehicles for their profit. They have built an empire on the foundation of convincing good women that they are nothing." He stood up. His movements were controlled, economical, each one deliberate. He extended his hand toward her, his palm open, his expression unreadable as stone. "So let me help you understand something different." Nora looked at his hand like it was a trap. A cage disguised as salvation. She'd spent her entire adult life learning that kindness from men always came with a price attached, and the price was always paid by her, in ways she couldn't control. But her ribs screamed with every breath. Her children were 3 blocks away in a car that barely ran. And in 6 days, Douglas Hale would come for her, and this time there would be no running left to do. She took his hand. His grip was firm but not cruel. He pulled her gently to her feet, steadying her when the pain in her ribs made her gasp. His men, Marco and Luca, appeared as if by magic, materializing from the shadows of the waiting room with the soft efficiency of people who spent their lives waiting for unspoken commands. "Take her to see her children," Aleandro said. "Then bring her to Lombardi's. We have things to discuss." "Boss," Marco said, his voice careful. "Are you sure about this? She's a stranger. She could." "Could what?" Aleandro's eyes cut toward his lieutenant like a blade. "Could be a plant? Could be working for Douglas? Have you seen her eyes, Marco? Have you actually looked at her, or are you so deep in survival mode that you've forgotten what innocence looks like?" Marco withdrew, his jaw tight, but something in his expression shifted. A recognition, perhaps. An acknowledgement that in 15 years of working for Aleandro Castellano, he had never seen his boss defend a stranger with such conviction. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song. The door slid open again, letting in another gust of October wind that carried with it the smell of rain beginning to fall. Somewhere in the building, a child cried out in pain or fear or nightmares. Somewhere else, doctors and nurses moved through hallways, saving lives, stopping the bleeding, stitching the wounds. But in the waiting room, something had shifted in the calculation. Something had broken open in the careful equations that governed Aleandro's world. And standing in that moment, with her hand still in his, Nora Harper felt the first tremor of a change that would remake both of their lives in ways neither of them could yet comprehend. 2 days later, the October sun hung low over Las Vegas, casting long shadows across the concrete parking lot of Riverside Elementary School. Nora stood at the fence line, watching children pour out through the double doors like water breaking through a dam. Emma emerged first, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her face lighting up when she spotted her mother. Behind her came Tyler, dragging his feet the way 5-year-olds do when the day has exhausted them completely. 20 feet away, Marco leaned against the black sedan, his phone pressed to his ear. His attention was elsewhere, a call from the warehouse, something about inventory. He did not see Douglas Hale slip between two parked cars like smoke. Nora saw him first. Her breath stopped. Her body went rigid. Douglas Hale emerged from the shadows wearing the same clothes he'd worn the night he beat her, his face twisted with the kind of desperation that made men dangerous. He was thin now, gaunt, his eyes hollowed out by something worse than fear. He was running. From someone. From Aleandro. Emma reached her mother's side, tugging on her sleeve. "Mommy, can we get ice cream?" "Not today, sweetheart. We need to hurry." But Nora did not hurry. She could not. Douglas's hand shot out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the soft flesh above her wrist. The grip was the same grip that had left bruises shaped like continents across her body. He pulled her backward, away from the children, toward the narrow alley between the school and a row of closed shops. "No." Nora twisted, trying to wrench free. "Emma, stay with Tyler. Stay right there." Emma froze, her small face crumpling with confusion and fear. Douglas dragged Nora into the alley. The smell hit her first, whiskey and sweat and the sour stench of a man who had not slept in days. His breath came hot and reeking against her face. "You know how much money I'm missing because of you?" "Because of him?" $125,000. That was my money. That was my future. His grip tightened. Nora's arm throbbed with each heartbeat. "Please. The children are right there. Please don't do this." "Time's up," he hissed. "You've got tonight. You bring me that money or I take the kids. I take them somewhere you'll never find them. Somewhere they'll learn what it means to owe Douglas Hale a debt." Terror, pure and crystalline, shot through her veins like ice water. Not the children. Anything but that. She opened her mouth to scream, but Douglas's other hand clamped down over her lips, hard enough that her teeth cut into the soft tissue. Blood filled her mouth, hot and metallic. His palm pressed so firmly she could not breathe, could not speak, could only make small, desperate sounds in her throat like a wounded animal. From the street, she heard Emma calling. "Mommy? Mommy, where are you?" Douglas's face twisted with cruel amusement. "She's looking for you. You want to know what I think? I think Castellano's already bored with you. A man like that doesn't keep a broken woman and her brats around for long. But me? I never get bored. I could break you for years and still find new ways to make it hurt." Footsteps. Fast. Running. Marco appeared at the mouth of the alley, his weapon drawn, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Release her. Now." Douglas moved with the speed of panic. He spun Nora around and pressed her back against his chest, his arm wrapping around her throat. In his other hand, a knife blade caught the afternoon light. The edge was not clean, it was serrated, designed to tear. He pressed the point just below her ribs, where her heart lived. "Back off or she bleeds out right here in this alley." Marco did not move. His gun remained raised, but his eyes found Nora's and held them. Steady. Watching. Calculating. The world compressed into that moment. The sound of children's voices from the playground. The distant wail of a siren. Douglas's ragged breathing. The weight of the blade against her body. Nora's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Then Douglas's phone rang. The sound was absurd, a generic ringtone, completely ordinary. Douglas hesitated. His grip on the knife wavered for just a fraction of a second. He answered with his left hand, keeping the blade pressed against Nora. "Hello? Who is?" A voice came through the speaker, so quiet that only Douglas could hear it clearly, but Nora caught fragments. She caught her name. She caught a threat written in measured, precise Italian-accented English. She caught the weight of absolute certainty in every word. Douglas's face went white. Actually white, the color draining from his skin like someone had pulled a plug. His mouth opened and closed. How did you?" The voice continued. Nora heard only fragments. Warehouse. East Tropicana. 1 hour. Alone. Files. Every woman. Run and I find you. Call Cordelia and I find her too. Douglas lowered the knife. His arm dropped away from Nora's throat. He stumbled backward, the phone still pressed to his ear, his entire body trembling. She could see the moment when survival instinct overpowered everything else. He ran. He simply abandoned the knife, abandoned his threats, abandoned any pretense of control and ran like a man fleeing a burning building. Marco stepped forward immediately, his hand gripping Nora's shoulder. Are you hurt? Nora could not speak. Her throat felt crushed. She tasted blood. She nodded because it was easier than explaining that yes, she was hurt, she was always hurt, but this was a different kind of hurt, the kind that came from understanding that Aleandro had heard that phone call. That he had listened to Douglas threaten her children. That he was already planning something. She looked toward the school entrance where Emma and Tyler stood frozen, their small faces tight with confusion and fear. She walked toward them with Marco a step behind, his weapon already holstered, his expression returning to the professional blankness of a man whose job was to protect and not to show emotion. That night, the safe house was silent except for the sound of the children breathing in their room. Nora had put them to bed twice. Both times they had climbed back out, frightened, needing to see her face, needing reassurance that she was still there. The third time she lay down with them, wedged between their small bodies, and did not leave. At 11 o'clock, after she was certain they slept deeply enough that nothing would wake them, she locked herself in the bathroom. She sat on the edge of the bathtub with her hand shaking so badly she could barely hold the photograph she had taken from her purse. It was the only image she had left of Michael. Her late husband. Dead 5 years, 4 months, and 16 days. She had counted. In the photograph, he stood in front of a car he was so proud of, his arm around her younger self, both of them smiling like the world was not a place designed to crush hope. His eyes in the photograph held such certainty. Such belief that their life was going to be exactly what they had planned. She had been wrong about so many things. She had believed Michael would live forever. She had believed the marriage would protect her. She had believed that working hard and being good would somehow shield her from cruelty. She had believed that she could outrun Douglas's reach, that she could build a life small enough to be safe. All lies. Every single one. The doctor had left pain medication on the counter 3 days ago. A small bottle. She had counted the pills inside. 32. More than enough to stop running. More than enough to let the exhaustion finally win. More than enough to sleep forever, to stop waking up afraid, to stop wondering if today was the day Douglas found them or the day Aleandro grew tired of her or the day the system that had failed her so completely finally closed its fist. Her hand reached for the bottle. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. The plastic was cool and smooth. The label listed the medication in pharmaceutical terms she did not understand. It promised relief from pain. It promised rest. From the other room, Tyler laughed in his sleep. It was the kind of innocent, joyful sound that children made, a sound that assumed the world was safe, that his mother would always be there to catch him if he fell. Nora's hand stopped. A moment later, Emma's voice drifted through the door. Drowsy and small and reaching for her. "Mommy? You okay?" Nora set the pill bottle down on the counter. She looked at her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She was hollow-eyed and thin and covered in bruises that were already fading to yellow. She looked like a woman who had been destroyed. But she was still here. She was still breathing. She was still her children's mother. She washed her face, splashed cold water on her neck, and walked back into the bedroom. Emma had crawled out of bed and was waiting in the doorway, her small body silhouetted by the hallway light. Mommy came back. Yes, baby. Mommy's here. Always. Midnight on East Tropicana. The warehouse rose out of the darkness like a monument to forgotten things. Douglas arrived exactly on time because he understood now that arriving late would only delay his ending. He carried a hard drive in his trembling hands. Everything. Names, locations, bank accounts, routes, buyers, dates. Everything he had built was on that drive. Aleandro Castellano waited inside with 12 men arranged in a semicircle around a single metal chair. The men wore black suits, black shirts, black expressions. They did not speak. They did not move except to breathe. They were trained in the kind of patience that came from understanding that violence is sometimes most effective when it is anticipated rather than delivered. Douglas entered the warehouse and the door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid. Aleandro sat in a chair across from the metal one, his legs crossed, his cashmere coat draped over his shoulders like an absent throne. He watched Douglas approach with the eyes of a man observing an insect. When Douglas attempted to hand him the hard drive, Aleandro did not reach for it. He simply watched until Douglas's arm fell to his side. "Do you know why I'm not killing you?" Douglas shook his head. He could not speak. His jaw was locked with terror. Because death would be too quick. Too easy. Too merciful for a man who buried women alive in his own ambition. Death ends things. But you, Douglas, you're going to live. You're going to live and remember every single woman you trafficked. Every single child you endangered. You're going to live and understand that some debts cannot be paid with money or blood or years in a cell. Aleandro stood. He did not move toward Douglas. He simply turned toward Marco and nodded. Douglas was restrained before he understood what was happening. Zip ties were applied to his wrists with brutal efficiency. Marco pulled them tight enough to cut off circulation, tight enough that Douglas's fingers began to turn purple within seconds. "Where are you taking me?" "Please, I'll do anything. I'll disappear. The Volkov brothers are waiting for you. You know them, yes? They lost 3 daughters to your network. I've given them very specific instructions. You are to be kept alive. Indefinitely. They have very creative ideas about how to spend their time with you." Douglas screamed. He actually screamed, a sound like an animal in a trap, primal and helpless. The warehouse swallowed the sound and gave nothing back. The black van was waiting. Douglas was dragged inside, still screaming. The doors closed. The engine started. And he was gone, delivered into a darkness that would not end until he had suffered in equivalent measure to the suffering he had caused. Across the city, at Carbone's, an upscale Italian restaurant where the wine cost more than Nora earned in a month, Cordelia Blackwood sat at a corner booth entertaining 3 pharmaceutical executives. She was draped in a white silk dress that cost $4,000. Her diamonds caught the candlelight like captured stars. She laughed, and the sound was the kind of laugh that came from someone who had never been told no by the world. Then the doors opened and Aleandro Castellano walked in with Luca and 4 men in black. The restaurant went silent. Forks stopped mid-air. Conversations died. Cordelia's laughter faltered when she saw him approach. Aleandro did not speak. He simply sat across from her and slid a folder across the white tablecloth. Inside were bank records. Inside were photographs of women, names, routes. Inside was Cordelia's signature on documents that proved she had not simply enabled trafficking. She had orchestrated it. She had profited from it. She had celebrated it. Cordelia's face drained of color. "You can't, I have connections. Senators. Lawyers. I have." "Federal agents," Aleandro said quietly. On cue, federal marshals flooded the restaurant from every entrance. The executives scrambled to their feet, scattering like roaches when the light comes on. "Cordelia Blackwood, you are under arrest for human trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and money laundering." She was dragged from the booth. Her white dress tore. Her diamonds scattered across the floor like fallen stars. She screamed and cursed and tried to claw her way back to her seat, as if remaining at that table could somehow undo the evidence, could somehow restore the image she had spent decades constructing. But the arrest had already been live-streamed. Within 1 hour, 500,000 people had watched a philanthropist exposed as a trafficking kingpin. By morning, 2 million had seen it. By the end of the week, every news outlet in the country carried her photograph, her makeup running, her designer dress torn, her face twisted in rage and despair. 40 years in federal prison. Total financial ruin. Her name would be forever synonymous with cruelty, with exploitation, with the specific kind of evil that hides behind charity galas and designer clothes. The world that had celebrated her now erased her completely. She had ceased to exist except as a warning. 1 week later, Nora stood in the safe house with her children, watching Maya and Tyler tear open boxes of toys, the first new toys they had owned in 2 years. Action figures with all their limbs intact. A doll with real hair. Building blocks that weren't missing pieces. The children's laughter filled the silence that had lived in her chest for so long, and for the first time in memory, the sound didn't make her afraid. It made her feel alive. Marco appeared in the doorway, his massive frame filling the space. "Boss wants to see you. Tonight." The restaurant. Nora's hand stilled. The fear that had driven her through 8 months of running had transformed into something else entirely. Not dread. Not the animal panic of being hunted. Something deeper and darker and entirely unnamed. The private booth at Lombardi's was lit by candlelight, the kind that cost more money per hour than Nora used to spend on groceries in a week. Basil and wine hung heavy in the air. Fresh bread steamed on a white tablecloth. Aleandro stood when she entered, and this time she didn't flinch. She walked toward him like a woman who had learned her own name again. "Sit. Please." He had ordered everything: pasta carbonara, risotto, fresh mozzarella, wine from a vineyard in Tuscany worth more than her old monthly rent. "When did you last eat a meal you didn't have to count the cost of?" Nora's eyes filled without warning. "I don't remember. I honestly can't remember." They ate in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't demand filling. Outside, Las Vegas glittered like a fever dream, all neon and hunger and desperation. Inside this booth, there was only the clink of silverware, the soft breathing of 2 people learning to exist in the same space without violence between them. Douglas Hale will never surface again. Aleandro spoke quietly, his voice like stone settling into place. Cordelia Blackwood will spend 40 years in a federal cell. The debt, all of it, is erased. You are free, Nora. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt unmoored, like a ship that had been anchored to the ocean floor for so long that cutting the chain left her drifting. What do I do now? An envelope slid across the tablecloth. Inside were keys. An apartment lease, paid for 1 full year. A check, not charity, something harder than that. A job offer. The restaurant needed a manager. Someone who understood what it meant to fight for every dollar, who knew the value of a meal that didn't come from someone else's garbage bin. The salary was enough. Enough for her children. Enough to rebuild. But Nora saw something else in his eyes, something that made her breath catch like a blade wrapped in ice. You didn't do this just because I saved Emma. Aleandro's jaw tightened. He reached for his wine glass and set it down without drinking. The night you pulled her from that car, I watched you shield her with your body. A stranger's child. You were bleeding, running from monsters, and you moved without thinking. Without calculation. After my brother's betrayal 15 years ago, I thought that kind of mercy was extinct. That humans who could act without self-interest had vanished from the earth. You proved me wrong. He paused, and in that pause was everything, all the years of hardening himself, all the deaths he had ordered, all the moments he had chosen survival over humanity. You saved me too, Nora. On my darkest night. She pulled the photograph from her purse, the only thing she had carried through everything, the image of her husband in his Navy uniform, his smile still bright even though the photograph had yellowed. She placed it on the table between them. I loved him. I still do. But he's gone. And I'm still here. Still fighting. Aleandro's hand moved across the table, his fingers stopping just short of the photograph. Not quite touching it, honoring the boundary between his world and the one she had lost. I'm not asking you to forget him. I'm asking you to let someone stand beside you while you remember. Nora's hand moved, and when it covered his, the touch carried the weight of everything unsaid. They were bound now, not by innocence or contract or blood oath, but by the mercy they had shown each other when the world demanded vengeance. By the choice to extend a hand instead of a weapon. By the impossible decision to build something instead of destroy it. The candlelight caught the edges of the photograph, and for a moment, neither of them moved. 6 months later, the restaurant hummed with the sound of conversation and clinking glasses. Nora walked through Lombardi's wearing a dress that actually fit her body, a dress she had chosen for herself instead of finding in a donation bin. The bruises had faded. The fear had retreated into memory. But the strength remained, etched into her like scars that had finally stopped bleeding. In the private dining room, Emma taught Maya and Tyler a card game, her small voice patient and kind. This child who had choked on a piece of apple in the back of a broken car now sat at a table with toys and full meals and the absolute certainty that tomorrow would come. She had been a woman with $34 in her pocket, running from monsters with 2 children and a vehicle that barely held together. She had saved a choking child on a freezing highway without knowing that child belonged to the most dangerous man in Nevada. And in that single moment of pure instinct, of mercy without calculation, she had saved herself too. The photograph of her late husband was restored now, placed in a silver frame that caught the restaurant light. Aleandro presented it to her on a Tuesday evening, the kind of ordinary moment that contained extraordinary grace. I had it restored. He spoke quietly, his voice carrying none of the threat it once held. Your husband deserves to be remembered beautifully. Nora's tears came, but they were grateful tears, not the tears of a woman broken. Thank you for letting me keep him. For not asking me to choose. He made you who you are. The woman who saved my family. I would never ask you to forget that. They stood together in the doorway of the restaurant, watching the children play, watching the life they had built from ashes and mercy. Not a fairy tale ending. Something harder. Something more honest. 2 people bound by shared darkness who chose grace when they had every right to choose vengeance. When you act with a pure heart in someone's darkest moment, you discover something extraordinary. You may realize you were saving yourself all along. The greatest power isn't measured in guns or money or the fear you inspire. The greatest power is the mercy we extend when we have every reason to walk away. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that one moment of courage can rewrite an entire life. Subscribe because tomorrow we bring you another story that will restore your faith in the unexpected bonds that save us. Drop a comment and tell us about a time someone showed you mercy when you needed it most. Remember this, sometimes the hand you reach out to save someone else is the hand that pulls you back from the edge too. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. Thank you for staying with us. We will see you in the next video.